Drone operators of the Madyar division under the Ukrainian armed forces have prevented a Russian army attack launched by the infantrymen with armored combat vehicles. The invaders, who sought to advance in 2 armored vehicles, were struck by successive strikes with kamikaze drones. As a result, both vehicles were burned and destroyed. Although the infantrymen in the armored combat vehicles were able to leave the vehicles with several injuries, they were later targeted by drones and were eliminated.
US Army gives up on light tank M10 Booker, designated as mobile protected platform with firepower. Now the US military does not know what to do with the vehicles already purchased. However, there is a way out, believes the author of the American publication 1945, military expert Isaac Seitz. They need to be transferred to Ukraine. The US Army currently has 80 M10 Booker light tanks, purchased under a 2021 contract with General Dynamics for the production and delivery of an initial batch of 144 vehicles. The military does not know what to do with them, as the resulting platform does not fit into existing combat concepts. Against this background, a proposal was made to send these vehicles to Ukraine, especially since the Ukrainian army needs any equipment that its Western allies supply it with. And what the US Army does not need, the Ukrainian armed forces will gladly accept. Another question is how the vehicle will perform on the battlefield, given that it has weak armor, a 105mm gun, and the air is dominated with drones. At the same time, the US could gain valuable information about the platform's performance in real combat conditions for the creation of the next generation of light tanks. In general, the offer has been made, but Ukrainian armed forces are unlikely to receive these vehicles given the Trump administration's position on the supply of military aid to Ukraine. As previously reported, the M10 Booker light tank, developed specifically for the US Army infantry units, turned out to be too heavy. The US Army refused to use it. The M10 Booker, developed by General Dynamics Land System, was intended to provide direct fire support to infantry brigade combat teams for all the controversies it's caused. The Booker is actually a relatively decent vehicle. It features a 105mm M35 tank gun, a 12.7mm M2HB heavy machine gun, and a 7.62mm M240B machine gun. The vehicle is powered by an 800 horsepower diesel engine, allowing it to reach speeds of up to 64 kilometers an hour and offering a range of 400 to 560 kilometers on a single tank of fuel. Despite its specs, the Booker simply was not what the army needed. Some argue that its weight, which is comparable to some main battle tanks, undermines its usefulness to the troops. In the end, the program was cancelled due to cost overruns, maintenance issues, and design concerns. The number of dead and wounded in the ranks of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale war is already approaching 1 million, but this does not affect the attitude of most Russians to the war and does not encourage them to protest. This was stated in an interview with Glavred by military political observer of the information resistance group Alexander Kovalenko. The reason here is also in psychological moments. Even being in this capsule, a closed information space, Russians still hear about big losses. Even Z military sometimes talk about the real number of losses, complain that it is a disgrace. At this rate, we will soon run out. What, Kyiv? We will soon run out Dnipropetrovsk, he points out. Kovalenko emphasized that modern Russian society is different from what it was in the late 80s and early 90s when people went out to mass protests with Molotov cocktails and rebar in their hands. Today's Russians will not go out into the streets without a push from an influential internal force, primarily a security agency, because there is virtually no real political opposition in Russia. According to the expert, only if someone from the security wing is interested in a change of power, in particular in removing Putin, will a protest movement be launched, and the people themselves will never take to the streets. Russians are an amorphous, spineless mass. They need stimulation from outside or from within, and this stimulation can only be organized by a certain person or force that has power and influence. He concluded, in this case, the United States has assured European officials that Washington is prepared to impose sanctions on aggressor Russia that the Americans have promised to launch if the Kremlin refuses to end its war in Ukraine. The Trump administration's stance on Moscow is hardening, with some officials arguing that Putin is blocking peace. Bloomberg's report says that European officials are frustrated with Trump's stance on new sanctions against Russia. Trump needs to understand Moscow's lack of serious plans for peace, after which the US should take decisive action. According to journalists, Washington's position towards Russia has hardened. The White House considers Putin the main obstacle to a peace agreement. Moreover, journalists write that American officials, during meetings with Europeans in Turkey this week, expressed their readiness to launch sanctions against Russia after Moscow announced that it was sending a low-level delegation to the talks. I hope that next week we get some movement on this, because Putin has not been able to come to the table. President Trump has made it clear that he is positive about sanctions. Our European allies are very supportive of him, and I think the moment is now, said Senator Richard Blumenthal, a Democratic Party member.